How can 5 children vanish from a house fire and leave no trace behind, no bodies, no bones, not even a single piece of evidence they were ever in that house when it burned? The case is real, the pain is real, and almost 80 years later, it's still unsolved. This is the story of the Sodder family, an ordinary household in a quiet West Virginia town whose lives were shattered on Christmas Eve, 1945, when their home caught fire in the middle of the night. In just 45 minutes, their house was reduced to ashes. But the strangest part? The bodies of their 5 missing children were never found. Local authorities said it was just a tragic accident. But what if it wasn't? What if this fire was a cover-up? What if the children didn't die that night? And what if someone out there still knows the truth? Stick around, because what happened to the Sodder children isn't just one of the oldest cold cases in America. It's one of the most chilling mysteries that refuses to stay buried. Before the tragedy, the Sodder family lived a quiet, hard-working life in Fayetteville, West Virginia. George Sodder had come to the U.S. from Italy when he was just a teenager. He built a good life from the ground up. He owned a trucking business, worked long hours, and made sure his family had everything they needed. His wife, Jenny, was warm, strong, and devoted to their home and 10 children. Yes, 10 kids. It was a full house, and there was always something going on. The Sodders weren't rich, but they were comfortable, respected, loved in their community. But George wasn't afraid to speak his mind, especially when it came to politics. He was very vocal about his hatred for Mussolini, the dictator ruling Italy at the time, and in a small town with other Italian immigrants, not everyone agreed with him. Still, life went on. The family focused on their kids, their work, and each other. On December 24th, 1945, everything seemed normal. It was Christmas Eve. The tree was up, the kids were playing. There were presents and laughter. None of them could have imagined that by morning, half of their family would be gone. It was a quiet, cozy Christmas Eve in the Sodder home. The older kids were out. Marion, the oldest daughter, had gone into town to buy surprise gifts for her younger siblings. She came back that evening with toys, and the little ones were beyond excited. The family stayed up a little later than usual. They shared stories, played with their new gifts, and soaked in the holiday spirit. Eventually, Jenny decided it was time for bed. Around 10 p.m., she told the younger kids, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, to head upstairs. But they begged to stay up just a little longer to play, and since the older siblings were still awake and watching over them, Jenny said yes. George and Jenny headed to bed, their minds at ease. Just after midnight, things started to feel off. The phone rang. Jenny answered it. On the line, a woman's voice asked for someone Jenny didn't know. There was laughter in the background, strange, distant voices. Jenny told her she had the wrong number and hung up. As she went back to bed, she noticed something else. The lights were still on. The curtains weren't drawn. Strange, because the kids usually did that before bed. But she didn't think much of it. She turned everything off and finally went to sleep. Then, not long after, she was jolted awake. Smoke. The smell was thick and sharp. She ran to wake George. They shouted for their children. Chaos exploded in an instant. 5 of the children, Marion, Sylvia, John, and George Jr., made it out safely. But the other 5? Still inside. Upstairs. George smashed a window to re-enter the house. His arms got cut. The smoke was blinding. He couldn't get through. He ran outside to grab a ladder to climb to the 2nd floor, but the ladder was gone. He tried to start both of his trucks, hoping to back them up and stand on the roof. Neither one would start. Both had worked the day before. The fire moved fast, too fast. In just 45 minutes, the Sodder home was nothing but a pile of smoldering ash, and the 5 children who were last seen inside were never seen again. By the time the fire department arrived, it was already too late. The Sodder home had burned to the ground in under an hour. Just ashes, smoke, and silence. But the response itself? It was bizarre. The fire chief, F.J. Morris, didn't even drive the truck. He said he couldn't drive it and waited until someone else could. The fire department didn't show up until 8 a.m., 7 hours after the fire had already started. Even with the house reduced to rubble, there were no signs of the 5 missing children. No bodies, no bones, no teeth, nothing. Authorities claimed the fire was hot enough to completely cremate them, but that just didn't sit right with Jenny. She started doing her own research. She burned chicken bones, pork bones, even beef bones in their fireplace. Every time, bones remained. So why were there no remains of 5 human bodies? In a fire that lasted less than an hour? Even a crematorium takes hours at much higher temperatures to reduce a body to ash. And this was just a house fire. Things weren't adding up. The Sodders weren't just grieving anymore. They were asking questions, and those questions would lead them down a path no one expected. By the time the fire department arrived, it was already too late. The Sodder home had burned to the ground in under an hour. Just ashes, smoke, and silence. But the response itself? It was bizarre. The fire chief, F.J. Morris, didn't even drive the truck. He said he couldn't drive it and waited until someone else could. The fire department didn't show up until 8 a.m., 7 hours after the fire had already started. Even with the house reduced to rubble, there were no signs of the 5 missing children. No bodies, no bones, no teeth, nothing. Authorities claimed the fire was hot enough to completely cremate them, but that just didn't sit right with Jenny. She started doing her own research. She burned chicken bones, pork bones, even beef bones in their fireplace. Every time, bones remained. So why were there no remains of 5 human bodies? In a fire that lasted less than an hour? Even a crematorium takes hours at much higher temperatures to reduce a body to ash. And this was just a house fire. Things weren't adding up. The Sodders weren't just grieving anymore. They were asking questions, and those questions would lead them down a path no one expected. By the time the fire department arrived, it was already too late. The Sodder home had burned to the ground in under an hour, just ashes, smoke, and silence. But the response itself? It was bizarre. The fire chief, F.J. Morris, didn't even drive the truck. He said he couldn't drive it and waited until someone else could. The fire department didn't show up until 8 a.m., 7 hours after the fire had already started. Even with the house reduced to rubble, there were no signs of the 5 missing children. No bodies, no bones, no teeth, nothing. Authorities claimed the fire was hot enough to completely cremate them. But that just didn't sit right with Jenny. She started doing her own research. She burned chicken bones, pork bones, even beef bones in their fireplace. Every time, bones remained. So why were there no remains of 5 human bodies? In a fire that lasted less than an hour? Even a crematorium takes hours at much higher temperatures to reduce a body to ash. And this was just a house fire. Things weren't adding up. The Sodders weren't just grieving anymore. They were asking questions, and those questions would lead them down a path no one expected. As the weeks passed, the Sodders couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. This wasn't just grief, it was gut instinct. The fire didn't feel like an accident, and the things surrounding it? Way too strange to ignore. For starters, George's outspoken political beliefs had made him a target. He didn't just dislike Mussolini, he despised him. He would argue with other Italian immigrants in town who still supported the dictator, and some of those arguments got heated. Could someone have wanted revenge? One man, possibly connected to the local Italian community, had even come to the house a few months earlier, looking for work. He pointed at the fuse box and said, "This will cause a fire someday." At the time, George thought nothing of it, but looking back, it felt like a warning or a threat. Then there was the insurance salesman. George had declined a life insurance policy not long before the fire. In response, the man told him, and this is a direct quote, "Your house is going up in smoke, and your children are going to be destroyed because of the dirty remarks you've made about Mussolini." Think about that. Someone literally threatened his house and his children before the fire. And if that doesn't make your skin crawl, get this. On the night of the fire, a neighbor claimed she saw someone watching the Sodder house from a car parked along the road, just before the flames broke out. Another witness said they saw someone tossing what looked like fireballs onto the roof. Could it have been a Molotov cocktail? An intentional arson? More and more, the Sodders started to believe the fire was a cover-up, and the real question became, if someone started the fire, what happened to the children? As the Sodders kept digging, they realized something else. The people in charge of the investigation, they weren't asking the right questions. In fact, they didn't seem very interested in finding answers at all. The fire chief, F.J. Morris, originally said no remains were found, but later, he changed his story. He suddenly claimed he did find something in the ashes, a heart. Just one. No bones. Just a human heart, he said. But when that so-called heart was sent to a local funeral director for examination, it turned out to be nothing more than a cow liver, wrapped in newspaper, buried in a box. That's not just suspicious. That feels like a cover-up, and it didn't stop there. The coroner's jury, made up of people close to the fire chief, ruled the fire accidental almost immediately, before any real investigation was even done. And just like that, the case was closed. Death certificates were issued for the 5 missing children, even though no remains were ever found. No proof, no evidence, just paperwork. The Sodders pleaded for a deeper investigation, more digging, anything. But the local authorities told them it was time to move on. They didn't, and they never would. After the fire, after the investigation was closed, the Sodder family didn't give up. They refused to accept that the truth would never come to light. So, George and Jenny took matters into their own hands in the most public way possible. They put up a billboard, a huge, attention-grabbing billboard along Route 16, the main road between Fayetteville and Charleston, West Virginia. The sign wasn't just a simple memorial, it was a call for justice. It boldly displayed the names and ages of their 5 missing children: Martha, 12, Maurice, 14, Louis, 9, Jenny, 8, and Betty, 5. And below the names, the question, what was their fate? The billboard was a stark reminder for everyone who passed by, a chilling question left unanswered. And it wasn't just up for a few months. It stayed there for years, a haunting message to anyone who was paying attention. George and Jenny never stopped looking for their kids. They went to every lead, followed every piece of new information, and traveled to cities across the U.S., hoping to find even a shred of proof that their children were alive. As the years passed, the family never stopped believing, and that billboard became a symbol of their heartbreak, their hope, and their refusal to back down. The sign didn't just stand for the missing children, it stood for the truth they were still searching for. Even after George passed away in 1969, and Jenny continued the search alone, the billboard remained, a silent witness to their pain and persistence. Over the years, As the search for the missing children continued, something strange started to happen. People started coming forward. People who claimed they had seen the Sodder children after the fire. One of the first tips came from a woman who lived in Charleston, West Virginia. She said that just days after the fire, she saw the children in a car with 2 adults. She described the car in detail, and the children seemed frightened. Was this just a coincidence? Or had the children been taken, stolen, and forced into hiding? Then, a more shocking claim came from a man in Florida who said he'd seen a boy who looked exactly like one of the Sodder children. He said the boy was in a restaurant, sitting with a couple who were acting strangely protective. But the most chilling claim came in 1950. A letter was sent to the Sodder family. It contained a photo of a young man in his 20s. The photo was grainy and hard to make out, but the message that came with it was even stranger. Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie. Lil boys. Adoksan bin yuz otuz iki. The letter didn't make much sense, but it was enough to shake the family to their core. Was this their son Louis sending a message for help? Was he trying to say something, or was it a code? George hired a private investigator to track down the photo's origins. But the investigator vanished. No one heard from him again, and there were other sightings. People reported seeing the children in various states, always with strange adults, always looking scared, always refusing to speak. Could these sightings have been genuine? Could the children have been kidnapped, then forced to live a life without knowing who they really were? Or was it all a coincidence, a mix of mistaken identity and confusion? As the years went by, the leads became more and more confusing, and fewer people came forward with information. But the Sodders never gave up. They held on to hope until the end. Despite all the years that passed and the many dead ends they ran into, the Sodders never stopped hoping. Jenny, especially, refused to let go. She kept the billboard up for years after George passed away in 1969. Even though she was alone, her search never stopped. Her resolve never wavered. But no matter how much time went on, there were no more answers. The authorities wouldn't reopen the case. The clues grew cold. The tips became fewer. And the world seemed to forget. Then, in 1989, Jenny passed away at the age of 84. She took her unanswered questions to the grave, but her legacy and the fight for justice didn't end there. The story of the Sodder children continues to haunt the town of Fayetteville, West Virginia. And it's not just a local mystery, it's one of the most chilling, unsolved cases in American history. In recent years, there have been new calls to investigate. True crime enthusiasts, podcasters, and even amateur sleuths have picked up the case again. The internet is buzzing with theories, and new eyes are looking at the evidence. But after almost 80 years, the truth is still elusive. What happened to the Sodder children? Was the fire really an accident, or was it something much darker? Could they still be alive? The mystery remains unanswered. And that question, the one that's been on the billboard for all these years, still lingers. What happened to the 5 Sodder children? The truth might never be known, but for the Sodder family, one thing is clear. They never stopped loving their children, and they never stopped hoping for the day when they would finally come home. The first and most obvious theory is that the fire really was just an unfortunate accident. The fire started in the middle of the night, and the kids, being up late, might not have been able to escape in time. The blaze could have spread too quickly for them to get out, and the intense heat might have consumed their remains entirely. But here's the problem. No remains were ever found. No bones, no teeth, not even a scrap of clothing. That just doesn't add up. when you consider how long the fire lasted and how long it typically takes for bodies to completely burn. The idea that the children were completely cremated in under an hour is hard to believe. The children were kidnapped. This theory suggests that someone deliberately started the fire to cover up a kidnapping. Maybe the children were taken by someone who had a personal vendetta against George Sodder, or had a reason to harm the family. There are multiple reported sightings of the children after the fire, including the mysterious letter sent in 1950 with a photo that seemed to show one of the Sodder children grown up. These sightings, and the fact that no bodies were ever found, leave open the possibility that the children were alive and forced into hiding or adopted under a false identity. The fact that George had made political enemies, especially in the Italian-American community, adds fuel to this theory. Could someone have been seeking revenge? The fire was deliberately set to destroy evidence. Another theory is that the fire was set to destroy evidence of something much more sinister, like a criminal activity or illegal operation happening at the Sodder home. This could have been connected to George's outspoken views, or even something more personal. Maybe someone used the fire to wipe out any evidence of what was really going on behind the scenes. Perhaps to silence George or to cover up something in the family's past that we'll never know. One chilling possibility is that someone in the town knew the family's routine, knew where the children were, and planned the fire with the sole intention of getting rid of them without a trace. A government or organized crime cover-up. This one is the most extreme, but it's still something worth considering. Could this have been tied to something much larger? Some believe that the Sodder case could have been connected to organized crime or even government activity, perhaps a covert operation involving the family's outspoken views on Mussolini or their connections to other political issues at the time. While this seems like the most far-fetched theory, it does fit with the idea that so many strange things happened surrounding the fire. Everything from the strange phone call Jenny received to the bizarre behavior of the local authorities. Could someone powerful have had a hand in covering up the truth? The children were victims of a cover-up. And finally, the theory that many believe still holds weight today. The children were victims of a deliberate cover-up. Perhaps there was a larger conspiracy at play. One where local authorities or other powerful figures intentionally allowed the case to remain unsolved or closed prematurely. This would explain the lack of any serious investigation after the fire and the quick rush to rule the case as an accident. If this is true, the fire wasn't just a tragedy, it was a distraction. And there you have it. The mystery of the Sodder children is as haunting as it is puzzling. Almost 80 years later, the questions still linger. What really happened that Christmas Eve in 1945? Was the fire an accident? Were the children victims of something much darker? Or could they still be out there, living in hiding after all these years? The Sodder family's fight for answers continues to inspire people to ask questions, dig deeper, and search for the truth. Even after all this time, the mystery remains unsolved. But you, yes you, could be the one to crack it. Maybe you've got a theory that no one has considered, or perhaps you know something about the case that could lead to the truth. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think the children were kidnapped? Was it a cover-up? Or is there another explanation we haven't even thought of? If you enjoyed this story and want to dive deeper into more unsolved mysteries, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. We've got more strange and unsolved cases coming your way. And as always, thanks for watching. Stay curious and never stop seeking the truth. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next one. Bye for now.